Welcome into the podcast. Today we're talking with ToriAnn Perkey from Orem, Utah, and she talks all things choir director, right? The ward choir director, the state choir director. And this is a calling that maybe doesn't get enough content, right? I mean, we have a series of music-focused episodes in the next few weeks, but hopefully you can gain from ToriAnn's experience. And if you know a choir director, especially somebody who's been called to as the ward choir director, they don't have too much confidence in it, or they don't feel prepared enough to step into that role, this would be a great episode to talk about. Listen for the great tips like ToriAnn mentions, the asking for feedback, reaching out to people and asking, almost surveying, like, why don't you come to choir and how can we make it better, especially for those who enjoy singing but don't come to choir, right? How do you market it to the point that you don't become overwhelmed, but you at least know that people are aware of it and that you are drawing them in and making it exciting, bringing energy to the calling. ToriAnn does a great job on this. And then just that relationship between the choir director and the bishopric and making sure the resources are there and that it really is a positive experience and adds to the meeting. And not just adding the meeting. I love this portion of that ToriAnn mentions of turning every choir practice into a spiritual meeting where faith is shared, where connections are made, and the Spirit is just so present. It's great idea. So here's my interview with ToriAnn Perkey, the ward choir director. All right, ToriAnn Perkey, welcome to the Leading Saints podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is great. We're going to talk all things ward choir, state choir, all those things, right? Because that's an important, sometimes overlooked leadership role in the church, right?
I would agree with that. Yes, I'm excited.
So what's your history with this calling? Have you been pigeonholed as you're always the go-to person for these things?
Maybe, although I think maybe a better way to say that is the Lord sees ability and, like, I don't know, or maybe leaders just see that I can do certain things. But so I've probably been I've been an adult member of the church for 30-ish years. And probably 20 plus of those, I've either been a ward choir director, state choir director, and or concurrently a music coordinator, stake music coordinator, something like that. So I've been doing this for a long time, on and off over a variety of years.
Yeah. And do you have a general music background at all?
So I loved music. I'm self-taught on a couple instruments. I did band in high school and stuff like that. And then the senior year of my high school, they decided to start a marching band. So I became the drum major, but it's not like I had years of drum major experience. That was my only conducting experience. And then after that, it's all just, loving to conduct to music in the car and things like that. So no, I don't have any professional training in music beyond what I did for fun in high school.
And then is there anything about because you're in Orem, Utah, is there anything about your stake or ward that, about the demographics or anything that would be important to note as far as how it relates to the choir?
Yeah. So I think that's an interesting question. So originally I was called to be the ward choir director in Columbus, Ohio. So that was where we lived when I first was called. And then I was called to be the ward choir director and the state choir director concurrently in Ohio. And that was a very different dynamic and then I've served as this ward choir director in my ward for 3 separate times over the course of 15 years. And now I'm the state choir director again. And what's interesting is every single time it's different. So in my first ward in Ohio, there were some older, more settled families, but I would say about half the ward was like a young married family ward, lots of young kids. I had young kids at the time. I was having kids while I was conducting and things like that. And then we moved, and then I went on to the stake, and the stake level was very different because, out there you're spread way apart. It takes 60 minutes to an hour and a half or 2 hours to get around the stake. So trying to have stake choir experiences was different than a ward choir experience, right? And then I moved here, and coming to choir is easier because you're not having to drive as far to get to choir. But a settled choir that doesn't have lots of young, vibrant musical families is really different than that. And the dynamic in my ward from 15, 16 years ago is really different than my ward or stake now. So I would say that I'm in a traditional Utah ward, spread of families, things like that. But every single time I've been a choir director, the rules have kind of changed.
Yeah. Well, that's I'm glad you brought that up then, knowing that you've had this experience, not just along the Wasatch Front, right? So that's cool.
Yeah.
Anything else? Any before we jump into your principles, that kind of lays the groundwork for us, or any other detail that's worth mentioning?
I think as I think about all the different things I've done, I feel like my story. Can I just lay out a little bit of like how
Yeah,
this played out?
yeah,
So
please.
initially, I get called to be a ward choir director, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever been asked. I almost said no. I sat there and I just thought about it because I didn't know how to conduct a choir. And even though you're musical, doesn't mean you know what you're doing. And and I think that it's a really good example where sometimes leadership looks at someone and says, "Oh, I think you can do this because you sing or you've been in choir before or whatever." And so that was really interesting. And then to be concurrent, so then when they asked me to come into the stake level, the reason was my stake in Ohio had been doing a cantata, which is, to make it very simple, it's kind of like a musical story with some narration in between the songs. And we'd been doing the same one for 20 years for Christmas. And they brought me in because they wanted to change it. And they needed someone who was going to be the change maker. And that was really hard. And so the leadership was like, we need to bring someone in who has done the cantata once, but we're going to change that. And I think that also, I think that's really interesting. It's so interesting as you look every time I was called, one of the running themes, and I think this is important, was the choir is dead or dying. Usually it's dead. Like sometimes choirs are really robust, but then over time they drift and dwindle. And then sometimes it's more like 6 people standing up there. Or in the first situation, there were 3 people who did a performance and then nothing happened for several months. And that's been consistently the pattern for me. And I'm not saying that's the case for every leader in stake or ward choirs, but I was called to resurrect it after it kind of died in my current ward. And then the most recent time that I was called to be stake choir director, which was just this summer, they said, we need to resurrect the choir after COVID. And actually, the last time I got called to be ward choir director in my ward, it was also after COVID. So that is a consistent pattern. And I think will be helpful to know as we start talking about some of my principles about how you successfully run a choir, because part of it is, what do you do when no one wants to come? Because I think
Yeah,
that's one of the biggest challenges of ward choir
yeah,
and
it's
stake
huge.
choir is like, how do you get people there when they don't have to come? Their temple recommend is not dependent on whether or not they show up at choir.
Yeah,
And I think, so, as we talk about things, I think that's important to recognize.
cool. Well, let's get into it then. We'll touch on those as they come up. First principle being ask questions and get feedback.
Yeah. So I kind of fell into this concept with the very first time because I didn't want to show up at choir and not have anybody there. That probably says as much about me as anybody or as anybody else. Is I just didn't want to lead a choir of 3 people. That sounded miserable. And so I took the ward list, and anyone who was remotely active, as in I recognized the name, I called every single person. And this was before texting, before Google
Yeah.
Forms. And I
Wow.
said, okay, tell me why you like, if you come, do you sing? And if they were like, oh yeah, I've sung before, I'd say, great. If you've ever gone to ward choir, why did you stop going? Or what do you like about choir? Or if you can sing and you don't come to choir, tell me why. Like, what is it about choir you don't like?
Mm.
And I got a whole range of answers, whole range. But there were consistent patterns. There were things like, well, it goes too long, or I don't know what to do with my kids, or I don't like singing I can't read music, or I don't read music well enough to be able to learn the songs quickly enough, or the music's too hard. Like, I got all of this list of things. And then, um, based on that, I could go through and I could say, okay, well, I can solve this problem. I can solve this problem. We'll have a couple young women stay after and watch all the kids. And this was way before it was easy, I'll make recording tracks so that everybody can listen to the music if they can't read. I'll make sure I don't pick music that's super complicated. Um, you know, are they, so the first principle, I think, and this applies to anything beyond choir, anything that I call a silo calling, where you kind of work on the periphery and you have to beg people to show up. Like, I feel like relief site activities fits in this category. I feel like early morning stake mission prep could fit in. Like, there's places where what we have to do is is like entice people to get there, and we have to figure out why they're not coming. And I think a lot of times we assume they're not coming because of reasons that aren't necessarily true, and we can problem solve those reasons if we just ask. And as they give us feedback and we address those issues, they feel heard, and people are more willing to participate because they feel heard and they feel like their problems are being addressed, which I think is also really important.
Yeah, and that's just great advice for any calling or role, that, just reaching out to people who don't come, who are on the rolls or whatever, and say, why don't you come? I love to hear it, and just these are just data points you can start to collect, and then that can influence the inspiration that you get.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's been interesting is the answers have been different over the years, and how I have problem solved those things have changed over the years. In my current ward, we don't have a nursery for the children. We just don't, because it's a different need, a different fit. We didn't do that for state choir, but because the issues of why people can't come has changed.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Anything else about getting feedback and asking questions, or does that kind of cover it?
I think the only thing I would add to that is when I ask for feedback, I always stress that they're not going to hurt my feelings. Like, I've often had the benefit of being able to say, look, I've never been the conductor before, so you can't hurt my feelings. You're not going to tell me about the previous choir, right? Like, they're not talking about my previous choir. But I
Yeah.
think it's really important that people feel like if they give feedback, your feelings aren't going to get hurt, and that you genuinely want to know so you can address it. Because otherwise,
Yeah.
feedback just feels like you're spitting into the wind, and that's no fun, you know?
Yeah. And if they tell you that, choir practice is too long, and then you do it for a shorter time, it's like, wow, maybe I will come back, right?
Yeah. And I can go back to that person and say, did you know we've shortened choir? Guess what? It's only half an hour.
Yeah.
You said that was an issue. I would love to have you there.
Very good. All right. The next principle is market like crazy.
Okay. So going back to the idea that we have two kinds of callings in the church, at least I like to think of two types of callings. We have the
Okay.
ones where people are going to show up because they're going to show up. So primary teacher, all the way up to bishop, like Sunday callings, people are going to show up. And actually, a lot of callings that work with youth and teenagers, like younger children in primary and people are going to show up there too, because the adults get the kids there. Like, you're pushing your kid to go to youth activities
Yeah.
every week or whatever. So that's one category of calling. I don't have to worry about kids showing up in my primary class. I don't have to worry about young women showing up on Sunday. But anything in the other category is stuff where it's completely optional, which means that if people don't know about it, they will forget. We are so busy as a people that if I want to be successful, it is my job to go out and get the information in front of every people as much as humanly possible, and not worry that I'm oversharing. So I'm going to let people know where word choir is in the bulletin, and I'm going to send texts, and I'm going to send emails, and I'm going to say, guess what? These are the songs we're singing, and this is how long rehearsal is. I'm going to make it sound interesting, and I'm going to make it sound exciting. And going back to the first point, I'm going to talk about how we're problem solving things. And I'm not just going to send that once. I'm going to send it every single week. I think people come to choir in part if you send a reminder text every single week. And the more I send and let people know, the more likely they are to show up because they hear. And I think that goes along with that is the idea that every time you meet someone new, you say, do you sing? Do you want to come? I remember this is in Ohio, and we would have more new people show up in Ohio, right? Because it's that. And one day, this guy gets up and bears his testimony. I've never seen him before. So I made a beeline for him right after sacrament meeting. And I said, do you sing? And he's like, well, yes. And I said, great. This is where choir is. And it's right after church. And what part do you sing? He's like, I'm a bass. And I said, great. I did not know that it was his first time back to church in 15 years, or maybe his second time, but within a month. He became one of the most devoted regular followers. And after a year and a half, he said, coming to choir was an essential part of my journey back into the church, because I had a place where I felt like I belonged every single week. That wouldn't have happened if I wasn't like, I am going to go find every single human that can sing in my ward, and I'm going to invite them to be a part of this. It's just,
Yeah.
I think we have to pull people to us and get them excited.
Yeah. And so part of that is a lot of that marketing, just that those one-to-one interactions as you're engaging with people.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody knows about like putting it in the ward bulletin or
Yeah.
handing out a flyer, but it's the extra pieces that make it sound like you care, and your energy then makes them excited.
Yeah. Do people ever just say, no, I don't sing, or no, I do sing, but I have no interest in being in the choir? Or
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like I never saw it as a rejection. So let's say someone new shows up in the ward and I say, "Hey, do you sing?" And their answer is, no, we're just visiting." I'm like, "Well, great. I'm the ward choir director, so I asked that to everyone, but tell me where you're from." Like it became I would just transition or, "No, but I'm not interested in being choir." Actually, that's a two-part answer. If the no answer is no, I don't sing. I never sing. I'm like, "Oh, that is awesome. We need people in the congregation who love to listen to choir." Like if nobody's in the congregation, then that's not going to work either. So I'm so glad you're out there.
yeah.
But no, I don't come to choir is a different answer, because then it's like, "Oh, why don't you come?" And then you can address that. Or I would get, "No, it's not a good fit for me right now." I'm like, "Okay, great. Well, do you mind if I ask you later?" Like, I feel like it's kind of like missionary work inside, where you're just looking for, are they giving me reasons that are strong reasons? Or are they giving me reasons that are more like deflecting reasons, but maybe if we have a conversation, they're willing to come?
Yeah. Love it. That's really helpful. Anything else about marketing like crazy that you want to add? Or
I just don't be afraid that people are going to be annoyed. Like, you should assume that if you put out 10 different types of things, people will see one, right? Like, I just think that people are afraid they'll be annoying, and I have yet to be annoyed by hearing more announcements, because inevitably we're all busy and not paying attention.
next one you got is make it easy and simple to participate. How do you do that?
Okay. So I don't know. Have you ever been to ward choir? Have you ever
Yeah.
tried
No,
to participate?
I enjoy singing and I enjoy ward
Okay,
choir. Yeah.
great. And whether you're going to ward choir, state choir, whether you're going to anything, sometimes you can go to something and it feels disorganized. It can feel like the person's not really sure what's going on. Specifically in choir, you'll see things like, "Oh, I was trying to get the music photocopied, and so we're running late." Or, "Well, I'm not really sure. Like, we're just going to like look at this song, but maybe we'll do this song," or whatever. Or whatever. Or it'll be, "Oh, I thought I'd scheduled the building to rehearse, but actually we're going to move because I didn't know about this." It can be all kinds of things.
Mhm.
And the challenge is that the more sticky points where people are frustrated or they're kind of annoyed or they're not engaged, you give people reasons to not want to be there.
Mhm.
And so when I say make it simple and easy, I'll give some specific examples from ward choir, but I think it applies to like anything that you're doing, that you're putting on an event for people. It's things like, do I have music for every person who I think will participate? So no one has to feel like they don't belong because they don't have a song, a sheet music to read. Do I have an assigned folder so they know how to find their music, so they can make notes in their music, so that they can then have that music every single week? Do they know exactly where we meet? Do they know if we're not meeting? Do they know what the plan is? Can they plan on it ending at a certain time? I think my job because I'm like a little mini event coordinator every time I do a rehearsal, right? And so my job is to sit there and think, where are all the parts where this could get, I don't want to say boring, but it could be a sticky point. Does everybody have a pencil? If they don't have a pencil, how can I ensure that everyone has a pencil so I'm not stopping in the middle of the rehearsal to hand out pencils? How do I make sure everybody has music so I'm not stopping the rehearsal and making everyone wait because someone walked in 20 minutes late and they don't have the music? And,
Yeah.
there's all kinds of ways to problem solve that. Can I ask the sister so and so that is faithfully there every week and just say, "Would you be in charge of handing out the music if someone walks in late so I can keep the rehearsal moving?" And I think simple and easy is about thinking, how do I make it so crazy simple and easy for a person to come that they don't have any excuses? And so
Mm.
the reasons they're not coming are not because I have made it difficult to be there.
Yeah. No, that's again, all these principles are like so generally helpful with any leadership role that you have, or as you're trying to organize an effort, right, or a class, or so. Yeah, that's really good. Anything else that we missed as far as making it simple to participate, or that?
I think it would go back. I think what I would add is just go back to the feedback piece, right? People are going to tell you why it's not fun. They're going to tell you why it's complicated. They're going to tell you where they get frustrated. if they're honest with you. And then simple and easy is problem solving all of those things. So it's listening, and then it's also your own observations of where do things get stuck. It's both.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. The last principle is make it worth their time. I love it.
So I think this is dovetails off simple and easy, right? So the challenge with a choir is inevitably, if you're doing 4 parts, there's always a chance to be sitting and doing nothing. But choir directors and choir directors can make things move more quickly. Like we can plan rehearsals so that it doesn't feel like no one's sitting for a long period of time. But more importantly, I think when we're thinking about make it worth our time, I think about the mom who's got 2 teenagers at home and a 10-year-old and a 4-year-old. And if she chooses to come to choir, then that is an hour-ish from her Sunday. She is not with her family, right? If a dad chooses to come in addition to whatever meetings he's going to, that's an hour he's not with his family. We need to be aware that if we're inviting people to participate something in addition to all the other things they're already choosing to do, then it has to be more than just a guilt trip, like you should be in choir because God said we have to have a choir. That's not what it's about. It's saying, how do I it's about asking the Lord, how would you like me to make this experience so that the people who come feel edified, feel like this was worth giving me their time. I see if someone comes to an activity, if someone the number one resource that we have to give in our lives right now, for most of us, is our time, right? That's the most expensive resource. And if someone chooses to give me their time, that is a sacred stewardship because that's an hour they're not giving to other things that are important.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I'll give you this and it's changed. Like every time I would get this calling, my prayer would be, okay, what am I supposed to focus on? Why are we having choir? Why do you want this ward or this stake to have a choir right now? Because every time you get this calling, it's different. The ward makeup is different. The stake makeup is different. The direction from the leadership is different. And I think it's valuable to ask that. And you say, Bishop or your bishop counselor, like, why do you think our ward choir matters right now? And it's not just because the handbook says you should have a choir. That is not
Right.
it. So then once you know that, once you're getting that inspiration, the answer then becomes, okay, how do I build that up? So here's a great example. This last time in stake choir, I asked the question after I talked to the leadership, and they're like, well, we really feel like we want to resurrect the choir because of after COVID, and we just really want to bring music back into the stake, and we really want people to feel unified. And I was like, great. As I prayed about it, in addition, I felt like choir needs, for this group that's going to participate, choir needs to be a conversionary experience for the participants and not just so we can make music for stake conference. And so because of that, my goal wasn't just make it simple, make it fun, make it easy, all of these other things we've talked about. But I took some of the things that I've learned over the years from other people. I can't take credit for all the things I do at choir because that's really all about like you're collecting ideas. And I said, okay, at the end of every rehearsal, we will take 5 minutes and we're going to just read the words and think about what we've sung. And then I would tell them, I'd say, I'd like 1 or 2 of you to tell me, what does this music mean to you? And so we would have a mini testimony, 5 minutes, at the end of the rehearsal every single week. And not only does that enhance the performance, because then people actually know and have really thought about what they're thinking, but in addition, I could feel that the spirit, which goes from just supporting a practice, becomes this edifying moment where everyone is having a spiritual experience through the words and through the music. And then we would sing it again. And there's nothing like that after you've had a little testimony meeting and then you sing about it. I'm not saying that that's the right mode for every choir or every experience, but I think when I think make it worth their time, I want my choir members to walk away saying that I feel like I am a bigger, better version of myself because I showed up today. I feel edified. I feel like I can go through the rest of my week and I feel just a little bit more lift. And that's my job because I'm creating something they're going to give time to.
Yeah. Yeah. And because so many times choir practice can kind of just feel like this necessary step that nobody really likes. But hey, it's always fun to sing at state conference or in the ward, and so let's just get through the grind here. But instead, to step back and say, how can we really make this a conversion process, a spiritual process, even during the practices, so everybody is edified?
Yeah, I think that makes me think of something. It's been interesting to me over the years to notice that if we talk specifically about ward choirs and state choirs, one of the things they do, and this is ancillary to what you just said, is they bring people together who otherwise wouldn't necessarily come together. You can have a member of the Relief Society president singing with someone who's a primary teacher who's sitting, ideally you have youth coming, right? Like you have all of these different people who maybe we don't get to say 2 words to each other at church on Sunday. Maybe I never see you during the week, but choir allows me to create relationships that don't happen in other places. And I think so when we talk about making it worth the time, I think it's also recognizing when we say it's a unifying experience, and not just because we're singing together, it's because adults across the ward spectrum who have a common interest or are willing to they want to learn, come and associate together in a very unique setting. And often find a place to belong that maybe they don't feel like they belong in other places. And some of my dearest relationships over the course of my lifetime have been made as you're laughing and joking amidst the ward choir practice, which hopefully there's laughing and joking in every ward choir practice, because that's part of making it fun and making it worth there. But
So true.
It's been interesting to notice how often belonging in strong choirs matters to people.
Yeah. Any other, I'm just thinking like when it comes to, and you've touched on this a little bit, like working as the choir director, working with the Bishopric or the stake presidency, like how does that relationship go? Anything come to mind as far as how to improve that?
Yes.
Or work as a team,
I have had a variety of leadership. All my leaders have been amazingly supportive. I've never had one who was like, ward choir is not important and just like shoved me off in the corner. I've always felt supported. But different bishoprics run differently. And I'll stay at the ward level because I think the stake tends to be a little bit more organized. It tends to be a little bit more structured because it's usually stake conference that you're working with. So I've had bishops who will say, we would really like the music to align with music that aligns with the talks is amazing. That is a real, if you've just heard a talk on the atonement and then you sing I Stand All Amazed as a choir, talk about a reinforcement, right? But a choir cannot find out about the talks 2 weeks in advance. So I, as a choir director, and I should say music coordinators, I often held both callings together, but if they're separated, then the music coordinator and the choir director are working together. So we do need to clarify how the conversation happens. But I would go to the bishopric and I'd say, if you can give me the talks 4 months in advance or 6 months in advance, every single week will align with your theme. I can make every choir number align. And as a music coordinator, I can also make our special music align. It's not just, and even your hymns. But so one thing that leadership can do if they feel inspired and impressed that they want their music to further support what their messages that they're picking is to give the information just much sooner, because that's challenging. The second thing is to realize that while there is so much free music out there, it is nice to occasionally be able to buy folders and to make sure you can buy music. And so a budget for choir matters. And often I've had to go and sort of say, do I have a budget? And then inform them that $40 won't buy me one choir's worth of, that's one song, right? If I'm lucky, So appreciating that to have good choirs does require, especially, I believe, startup funds to buy folders and pencils and give me a place to store the music in the building. That's another one. Please, please, please. Every time I get assigned, every time I would get it in a new area, a box of music, or sometimes multiple boxes, would show up at my house. And I think, surely there is somewhere in the building we can hide this. And I would go to leadership and I'd say, please, is there an empty closet? Can we tuck this somewhere? No one's going to steal music, so it doesn't even have to be locked. But please, do I not have to keep this at my house? Please.
Yeah.
That's amazing and supportive. If you really want your ward choir to be successful, this is like, there's like the necessaries and then the like asks. I would say if you want your ward choir to be successful, then tell people don't plan meetings during ward choir. Like the biggest, hardest thing is that let's say you meet from 10 to 12 and then your rehearsal, you're the last person. No, let's do like 12 to 2. You're the last person in your building. Now you're going to have choir at 2:15 or 2:30 and everybody has their presidency meetings. So I can't get anybody to choir because everybody's somewhere else. And yet the bishop's
So true.
saying you need to have a ward choir. And I'm thinking, I literally don't know when, unless I hold it at 4:30, but then everybody's fixing dinner. Choir often is, you're supposed to create this amazing experience that requires, I would say, a large number of ward members and their response. And often it's like, well, fit it in around the edges, but you can't, like, if you want to have a consistently performing ward choir, there's lots of other ways to do ward choir. So I'm not telling the leadership how to do it, but I'm saying it is difficult to run a ward choir if everyone's planning presidency meeting during ward choir.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the more, and I think so then my last thing is this. Not every choir director will know to ask, but I think it's always helpful if the choir knows, if the director and the music coordinator, they know what the bishopric is hoping the choir will accomplish. And I don't know that all bishoprics think about that.
Yeah.
I don't know if they ever sit down and they think, why do we have a ward choir? Because if a bishopric, and I've had some who give that to me and some where I have to ask and then they have to think about it. But when leadership gives vision for a specific group, or they can say, well, you know what I mean? Like they can say, well, we really feel like our ward needs to work on unity right now. We really feel like we're just trying to really get the youth involved. Or they might say, our ward focus right now is temple work or whatever it is. Then as a ward choir director and a music coordinator, the people who are picking the music, I can reinforce that. I can sit there and I'd say, great, then every third song will be about the temple. Or I will do everything I can to get the youth there, or I can do a special youth combined number or whatever. Like I can build my choir to support the ward's vision if I know what they want me to focus on. So I would add, that would be my last thing, is just give me vision so I can fulfill it.
Really helpful. That's awesome. So much to consider here. How about any like apps or technology or I don't know, cool pencils you use, or I don't know, anything like the practical tools
Yeah.
maybe that come to mind.
So there is a free website that was built by some, I just love people who have talents and then they aren't looking to make money. I don't have any trouble with making money with people's like talents. Don't get me wrong. But there's a website called sacredsheetmusic.com. And anyone who writes a piece of music or is an accomplished composer who wants to share their music for free can put their music on that site. It is 6,000 sheet music pieces
Wow.
strong. You can filter by topic. You can filter by number, like soprano, alto, tenor, bass versus just like 2-part. You can look for a specific title. It filters in a variety of ways, which is why as a choir director, I need a lot less money than I used to. And the nice thing is I actually don't play the piano. So I can go and listen to many, many, many pieces of those sheet music have like MP3 recordings with them. So I can hear what it sounds like. So as a choir director, I would say that is my number one go-to resource in terms of finding sheet music, which is often the hardest thing. So you're either going to sing out of the hymn book or you're like dealing with music that maybe is 30 years old. But that is a wonderful resource. The second thing is, I think that sometimes people, get called and they don't know where to get additional training. Like sometimes I think people look at someone who sings and they think, oh, well, then of course you can lead a choir. Or of course you can play the piano, right? We think of playing the piano as a skill that you have to have had some lessons. And I don't know that people translate that to leading choir is separate than just being able to even conduct the music in sacrament meeting. That's a very different thing. And so there are, and I'm not going to point any specific ones, but there's lots of conduct out there. You can go out and find, how do I conduct music? The church has some very specific things they've put out. Depending on your resources, there are some workshops you can pay for, but there's also lots of YouTube videos. And I think learning how to conduct music is also something that's helpful. And I don't know if all choir directors or leadership understand that choir directors benefit from having training if they don't have it. I mean, I got really lucky in that I had some very specific things, and I like to practice conducting classical music in the car. But I
Nice.
with that, like I would just pretend. But even so, I went looking for things because I was like, I don't know how to do dynamics. I don't know how to cut people off. There's like very specific things you do to bring people in that's totally not intuitive. And it's a specific skill set,
Yeah, it's so
you
true.
know? So
Yeah.
like
Oh, man, that's
sending
really
someone
helpful.
off to be the like young men's camp hiking leader. I was going to say scout leader, but we don't have that anymore. And then saying we're going to call someone who has no idea how to camp, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You'd want to go learn some things.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, ToriAnn, this has been so insightful, so helpful. I'm sure this will be of help to many choir directors who need the help, who are looking for resources. So I'm glad this will be in our library. Any other point, principles, concept, story that we need to make sure we include before we wrap up? Or
I think the last thought that comes to mind is as a choir director, you can often not know the full extent of the impact you're having. I remember we were doing one of those little testimony moments in a state choir, and a guy raised his hand and he said, my wife passed away this summer, and we happened to be singing her favorite Christmas song. And every time I sing it, I feel like she's right next to me. And I think stories like that, if we hadn't opened the floor, which you don't always get an opportunity to do, you don't know that.
yeah,
The last time I got called as a choir director in my ward, it was for a relatively short period of time. And I'm not going to lie, I was a little burned out. And I was like, why am I doing this again? Right? Like, have I nothing else to give? And it turns out that there was one particular individual who I needed to make a relationship with, that we have continued that relationship because that particular individual needed something that was beyond what choir was going to provide. But that's the only way I would have connected with that individual. So I think trusting as a choir conductor, choir director, that your impact is bigger than just the songs you sing in sacrament meeting. And that doesn't even include all the things that happen when a song is sung. Right? Like
yeah.
you're making more of a difference in individual lives than it sometimes feels like you are.
That's great encouragement. Well, ToriAnn, as you reflect on your time as leading music, how has leading music helped you become a better follower of Jesus Christ?
Oh, you asked it a different way than you normally
I
do.
know. Sorry, did I throw you off?
um, it's a beautiful question. So the reality is, as a choir conductor, I stand up there and I cannot do my calling by myself. I'm in charge. Everyone's supposed to follow me. If we're all on the same page, I'm collectively molding sound to create an experience. That's my job. But without every individual voice in the choir, it doesn't work, right? Like I have to have all the parts and they have to be, each voice matters. And so I think if we think in terms of the Savior being the leader of the choir, and we've heard this, I mean, this is not the first time this metaphor is used, but my voice matters, my unique way of, every voice has its own sound. But as I stay focused on the conductor, I create a unified sound, and he leads and molds me to follow him where he's taking the entire group. And I think that becomes very apparent when you stand in that leadership role and you feel the power of creating a group coming with you and then thinking about the Savior taking that role and you sitting in the choir.